All right, Rabbosai, good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking all of our incredible sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Tishrei, Dr. Linda Weinberg, Sarah and Ricky Gratz, Julia, Rena, and Eve, in loving memory of their husband, father, and Zayda, Dr. Paul Weinberg, Peretz, Moshe ben Avraham, David, in commemoration of his second yahrzeit. To thank Ayal and Sara Steinberg for dedicating the shurim this month on the zechus of Refuah shelema for shulamis bas susha, and Yudit Ben Zev for dedicating the shurim this month on the zechus of all of our tefillos being miskabel. Our week of learning sponsors, Hilary, Jacobson, Kent, and Akiva, Kent, in memory of Mordechai, Menashe ben Shmiryahu. Nathan and Beth Adler for dedicating the shurim this week in memory of Ben Adler. HaChaver Baruch Moshe ben Mariam Rab Nassan. Said and Simahakin for dedicating the week of learning for the Refuah shelema of their granddaughter, Talia Miriam Bas Arli Yehudis. Our day of learning sponsors, Matt and Diane Marks, in memory of Golda Rochel Bas Ilana, beloved mother of Sarah Bloch. Judy and Joel Pomerantz, in honor of the entire Kehillah, for providing so many wonderful opportunities for Talmud Torah. Wishing everyone a Gemar Chasima Tova. We thank all of our sponsors for their generosity. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas will have an aliyah, the families in nechama, and all those who require a refuah should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. And with that, let us begin. We have a beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Pevav 86. We are picking up on Pehema Days 85b, 22 lines up from the bottom. It sounds like a lot, but it's not. It's not. It goes quickly. Says the Gemara. Both says, let's go weiter. Huda afkid metachso be Rav Dimi achua d'Rav Safra. So there was a guy who deposited matachso. Rashi says is levush meshi, a silk garment. He deposited a silk garment in the home of Rav Dimi. So what happened? Shachav Rav Dimi v'lo pakid. Rav Dimi passed away, and he did not leave instructions to his household. Meaning, Rav Dimi passed away, and halacha l'maisa, again, no one knew the status of this silk garment. So what happened? So they came before Rabbi Abba. So let's remember again. So someone shows up claiming to be the owner of the silk garment. Meanwhile, the Yarshim of Rav Dimi say, listen, maybe it belonged to our father. So they come to Beis Din. They come before Rabbi Abba. Number one, I know Rav Dimi did not have money, so it would have been strange for him to have a garment like this. So number one, I don't think that this was his garment. V'od hakayav simna. Furthermore, again, this guy showing up and claiming to be the owner of the silk garment is providing a siman. He's providing an identifying mark indicating that he is truly the owner of the silken garment. V'lo amran. And this idea that a siman is meaningful is only true when Ela delo ragil da'ayil v'nafik lahasam. If this guy wasn't the guy who was commonly in and out of Rav Dimi's home. Aval ragil va'ayil v'nafik lahasam. But if again this person would have been someone ultimately again who was in and out of Rav Dimi's home, then ultimately again the Gemara says the ema inish achrina afkid ve'il mechse chaza. Perhaps again halacha l'maisa, he was not truly the owner of this item. He just happened to see the item lying around and therefore was able to give a siman. Good. Beautiful. Hahuda amar lahu nechasei letuvya. We'll say another interesting case. A guy goes ahead and, before he passes away, he makes a statement, I'm leaving all of my property to Tuvya. Okay. What happens? Shachiv, he dies. We'll call him Ruvain. Ruvain, right? Ruvain, before he dies, says, all of my property is being left to Tuvya. Ruvain dies. Shachiv, also Tuvya. Tuvya shows up. Now both say, a guy shows up, takes out his driver's license, it says Tuvya. Fantastic. No one knows this guy from Adam, or from Tuvya, right? No one knows him. So now he's claiming he's Tuvya. Ruvain died. Ruvain said, I left my property to Tuvya. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Hari ba Tuvya. Ultimately, I get, okay, Rabbi Yochanan said, what are you going to do? Tuvya showed up, right? Tuvya showed up. Ruvain left his property to Tuvya. What more is there to say? Amar Tuvya va'asarav Tuvya. So we'll say, what happens if Ruvain, before he died, said, I left my property to Tuvya? A guy shows up, whose name is Rabbi Tuvya. Rabbi Tuvya. So now the shaila is this the Tuvya or not? So Amar le Rav, so the Gemara says, Vasa Rav Tuvya. Le Tuvya Amar, V'lav Tuvya lo Amar. So we'll say, look, that's not the guy. That's not the guy. Ruvain said that he left his property to Tuvya, not to Rabbi Tuvya. The Gemara says, however, v'i inish de gisbei ha gisbei. So this is interesting. However, if ultimately, again, the guy who shows up, Rav Tovia, is someone who Reuven was very friendly with. So maybe he was so close to them, he didn't call him Rabbi Tovia, just called him Tovia. Then Einachinami, this could be the guy. Asu Shnei Tovia. What happens if two guys named Tovia show up? Okay, so now we're getting. So two guys. So it happens to be Moshe in all of these cases, but we'll get through a bit more Gemara before we get into it. So two guys named Tovia show up. Now, here's what's interesting. One guy is a shachin, one guy is a Talmud Chacham. Right? So two Tovia show up. One is the neighbor Tovia, one is a Talmud Chacham named Tovia. So we'll see now. Here's the problem. Reuven left his property to Tovia. What did he not indicate? What did not indicate? Which Tovia? So now I've got a neighbor Tovia, a Talmud Chacham Tovia. Who gets the property? Talmud Chacham Kodem. Ultimately, again, a Talmud Chacham takes precedence ultimately over a neighbor. In other words, we'll say, what do you mean takes precedence? We assume that Reuven would have sooner left his property to a Talmud Chacham than to just stam a neighbor. Right? Concept ultimately, again, of being mahana, of allowing the Talmud Chacham to benefit from your property is an incredible zechus for us. So therefore, again, we assume he would have left it to the Talmud Chacham. Okay, listen to this. Karov a Talmud Chacham. So what happens if there are two Tovias? Two Tovias show up. One is a relative of Reuven, and one is a Talmud Chacham with whom Reuven had an association. So who do we assume he left the property to? Talmud Chacham Kodem. Ultimately, again, the Talmud Chacham takes precedence. I will say, again, just to understand, why does Talmud Chacham take precedence? That's because Chazal speak about the incredible zechus of being mahaneh, of allowing a Talmud Chacham to benefit from one's property. Right? If one has a hand in the support of a Talmud Chacham, so one shares in the schar, in the reward of the Talmud Torah, of the learning of that Talmud Chacham. So we assume that if Reuven says he's leaving his property to Tovia, and again, one of the Tovias who shows up is a Talmud Chacham, then Einachinami, it makes sense because Reuven would want that zechus in Olam Haba of supporting a Talmud Chacham. Good. So let's listen to this. What happens if two Tovias show up? One is a neighbor, one is a relative. Right? Who takes precedence? What says incredible Gemara? So Tashma, Tov Shachin Karov Me'ach Rachok. So what says the Gemara quotes the pasuk in Mishlei that says a close neighbor is better than a distant brother. Close neighbor is better than a distant brother. So meaning that sometimes people have close relationships with their neighbors than they have with their own family. It's also talking about the power of positive influence. How important it is. It's wonderful to have close relatives, but if your relatives are not in close geographic proximity, better to have a neighbor who has a positive hashbah. And you're able to say, sometimes we think that the only thing I need to be successful in life is personal fortitude, and that I am oblivious to my surroundings, right? What happens around me, people think this, and I could divorce myself from what's around me. I could be around negative people, I could be around toxic circumstances, I could expose myself ultimately again to religiously detrimental influences, and it's not going to impact me. And there's nothing further from the truth. We are impacted by the people we associate with, by the circumstances we allow ourselves to be in, by the influences that surround us each and every day. So Shalom Melech says, better to have a close neighbor than a distant brother, because your neighbor is someone who influences you daily. The brother is different. It's wonderful. I love him, but he's far away. Both say, what happens if two Tuvias show up? But in this case, again, both Tuvias are relatives. Both Tuvias are neighbors. Both Tuvias are Talmidei Chachamim. So we'll say, so again, we've established a hierarchy for which Tuvia we assume that Reuven was talking about. What happens if two Tuvias show up and what? They're on the quote unquote, have the same halachic standing. In that case, Shuda Dedani. I will say Shuda Dedani means judicial assessment. In other words, sometimes I will say in halacha, the legal framework can't give you absolute clarity, and it is up to judicial discretion to determine who we think Reuven really was referring to. Good. Only Rava Lebrei Rav Chia bar Avin. So let's listen to this. So Rava said to the son of Rav Chia bar Avin, Ta imulacha milsa ma'al yusa dahava amar avuch. So we'll say so beautiful. So here you have Rava talking to the son of Rav Chia bar Avin, and he says to him, let me tell you something beautiful that your father, Rav Chia bar Avin used to say. The Amr Shmuel, Hamocha Shtarchel B'Chaver. It's actually a fascinating case. Shmuel said, if a person sells a loan document to someone else, v'chazer umachlo, and then he goes out and forgives the debt, machos. So let me illustrate this to you for just a moment. Imagine for a second that Reuven went ahead and Reuven sold a loan document. Here, let's say like this. Reuven lent $1,000 to Shimon. Okay, so Reuven's holding a document, right? Reuven's holding a document. Now Reuven goes ahead and sells that document to Levi, right? Now Levi is in possession of the document, which means what? Levi has the power of collection. So now we're supposed to listen to this. So Shmuel said that halacha l'maisa, even after Reuven sells the document, Reuven has the ability to forgive it. So now, even though again Shimon bought the document from Reuven could still forgive the debt, and thereby rendering the document that Shimon is holding is what? Meaningless. So the Gemara says, so first of all, take a look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, Machol, the Amr le'lova le'lokeach, lav bal dvarim didiyat. Now we'll say, now what's the reason for this? The reason for this is because, understand, a loan is a relationship. So, I'm sorry, you know what, I mixed up the names, I'm sorry. Right, so once again, Reuven lent money to Shimon, right, $1,000. Reuven now Reuven's holding a debt, Reuven's holding a document, right? Reuven sells the loan to Levi. So Levi buys the loan, which means now Levi has the right to collect the debt from Shimon. After selling the loan, Reuven forgives the debt. Shmuel says, now obviously Reuven shouldn't do that, but he did it, right? Shmuel says it works. So now Levi is holding a meaningless piece of paper. So now Levi comes to Shimon and says, okay, I bought the loan. Shimon says, sorry, I owe you nothing. Reuven, the original lender, forgave the debt. Now, why is that? So Shmuel is very simple saying, because a loan is a relationship. And it's a relationship between two parties, a lender and a borrower. So technically, although Reuven has the right to assign collection to someone else, that new collector, in this case Levi, has no relationship with who? With the borrower, Shimon. So therefore, technically speaking, right? So Shimon has nothing to do with Levi. So because Shimon has nothing to do with Levi, and and the loan is really the nature of a relationship, even though Reuven sold it, Reuven still retains the power of forgiveness. Good. Now I will point out what we're not dealing with over here is what legal recourse Levi has against Reuven afterwards. Okay, that's a different discussion. Not only that, Shmuel also brings down Vafilu Yoresh. They will say, let's say now Reuven dies, and Reuven leaves behind the son. Just in order not to make this more complicated, we're just going to call him Reuven Jr., right? So now Reuven Jr. also has the ability to forgive the debt, right? Why? Because remember, again, when Reuven dies, what does Reuven Jr. inherit? His father's assets. Part of it. So interestingly enough, part of that estate is that relationship as a lender that Reuven had with Shimon. Okay, it's interesting. So the Gemara says, Umod Shmuel b'chnesa shtarchov lebayla v'chazro machalto she'eno machom me'shiyado ki'ada. There is one exception to this rule. Let's say Reuven marries Rochel, and Rochel brings into the marriage a debt, not that she owes, but that's owed to her. She's a lender. So now what happens? So now Rochel happened to have lent Shimon money. She brings in that note into the marriage, and she decides that she wants to forgive the debt. That case, she doesn't have the right to do so. Why? Because once she brings that debt into the marriage, ultimately, again, Reuven, her husband, also has rights in that debt. So she can't forgive it, ultimately, again, without his consent. Okay, incredible. Let's go back to so Krivese Rav Nachman Zavina Kesuvos B'Tovas Hana. So let's listen to this. A relative of Rav Nachman, a relative of Rav Nachman, went ahead and sold her ksuva for tovas hana. Now look at Rashi. Zivinta l'ksuvasa machra shibut ksuvasa la'achirim ba'ol l'tachas baila. So we'll say, now we've actually touched on this before, but a woman could sell her ksuva. Now what is it when a woman sells her ksuva? What is she doing? What is she selling? She's selling a future. Right? She's selling a future right. A future. Now remember again, that ksuva may be worth something or may be worth nothing. right? When is it worth something? When is it worth something? It's worth something in the event that husband dies or divorces. It's worth nothing in the event that wife predeceases her husband, right? Because if wife predeceases her husband, there's no ksuva payout. So essentially what you're going to do is you're going to buy this ksuva right at a discount. No one's paying full ksuva face value, right? Because first of all, we're Jewish, you never pay full value for anything, right? But I'm just saying, but in addition to that, remember again, you may or may not collect that ksuva. So listen to this case. So a relative of Rav Nachman, a female relative of Rav Nachman, sold her ksuva. B'tovas hano. So we'll say igarsha. So listen to this. She went ahead and she got divorced, right? Ushchiva, and then she died. Now we'll say there's a bit more subtext to this over here. So what ended up happening, what I will say, is as follows. So she sold her ksuva, right, and then she died. Now what happens? So asu katavile lebarta. This woman left behind a daughter who was the sole inheritor. Now, creditors came to the daughter. What's happening here? Take a look at Rashi. Last Rashi in the daf. Asu tavile lebarte, asu lekuchos, vikatavile lebarta, haba ligvos ksuvas ima, me'aviha, velireish haksuva mikoach ima, ve'elu ba'in lita osemena, lomar imcha machralanu. So we'll say, so now, what happened? So now, here's what occurred. So, we'll call her Rochel, right? Rochel is the relative of Rav Nachman. She sold her ksuva. Subsequently, what happened? She was divorced. She got divorced, right? And so therefore, again, because she got divorced, there was a ksuva that was collectible, right? And then she died, leaving behind a daughter, a sole heir. After Rochel dies, creditors show up. Who are the creditors? The people who bought her ksuva, right? And now those creditors remember again, before Rochel died, she got divorced, which means there was a ksuva payout. So now she died. So they come to her daughter, the inheritor for her estate, and they say, listen, we bought your mother's ksuva. She was divorced before she died. We want to pay out. So we'll say, so what happened? Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman says to the daughter, Leka de lesbala itza, is there no one who's going to help out this daughter, right? The yoreshes, the inheritor, to give her proper legal counsel? What could she do? Abba says some estate planning, top of Pevav. Tezel v'techle l'ksuvasa di'ima l'gabe avuha. V'tir samine. Here's what this girl should do. Abba says it's actually an interesting answer. Here's what she should do. She should forgive. Now, Abba, remember again. So now the girl is the sole inheritor of her mother, which means she inherited the ksuva. Who is the ksuva payable from? Who is it payable from? From her father. Right now, again, remember, we're assuming right now that this girl is the product of Rochel and her ex-husband. So now this girl is a sole inheritor of both her mother and her father. Rav Nachman says a very simple eitzah. Let her forgive the ksuva to her father. Right? Even though the father now owes her the ksuva, so to speak, let her forgive that towards his estate. But she's losing the money. She's not losing the money. What is she doing? She's deferring the money. Because it will say she's the sole inheritor of her father also. Which means that what? When he dies, who's getting the money? She's getting the money. But if she forgives the ksuva now, again, remember, I will say, based on what we said before, you could forgive a debt even if it's been assigned to someone else. Let her forgive the ksuva, thereby negating the claim of the creditors. She won't get the payment now, but Lamaisa, it'll roll back into the estate. And when her father dies, she'll get paid out from the father's estate. It's a great, it's a fantastic piece of estate planning. So again, I will say, very simply, just one more time, right? Rochel sold her ksuva, future right to her ksuva. Rochel dies. Rochel gets divorced. Ksuva is payable. Rochel dies, leaving behind one daughter. Rochel is married to Reuven, leaving behind one daughter. After Rochel's death, the creditors, who's the creditors? In other words, the people who Rochel sold the ksuva to come to Rochel's daughter to collect the ksuva. So comes along Rav Nachman and says, let's give this girl a piece of estate planning. Tell her to forgive the ksuva. Remember, that's a debt. The ksuva is a debt owed by her father to her now. And what does Shmuel say? When someone owes you money, even if you assign that debt to someone else, you can still be mochel the debt. So let her forgive the debt to her father's estate. Ksuva rolls back into the father's estate. She'll get nothing now. But as the sole inheritor of the father, she'll inherit everything when the father dies. And what does it do? It gets the creditors off her back. Great Eitzah, to which the Gemara says, Shama azla chilta. So she listened to the advice. She went ahead and she was mocheles the ksuva, and ultimately got the creditor's offer back. Incredible. Rav Nachman, so I'll say this is such an incredible statement. Rav Nachman says, Asinu atzminu k'archa dayanin. We made ourselves like lawyers. Right? And I will say that's an insult. Right? That's an insult. Now what does that mean? What does that mean? It's the job of a lawyer to advocate for their client. Now, sometimes, unfortunately, the lawyer ignores the truth, right? Because the truth or the right thing to do is kind of obscured by the obligation they have towards their client, right? Again, this is the tricky piece sometimes that a lawyer could be in. There is the truth, and then ultimately, again, there's what's best for my client. Or I shouldn't even say the truth. There's what's right, and then there's what's right for my client. And sometimes those two things don't necessarily line up, which is why sometimes, again, it's difficult to be in that position. Rav Nachman said, I realized that what I just did is I gave this girl, right, who's his relative, a good piece of advice that was good for her. But that same piece of advice did what? Was detrimental to someone else. So Rav Nachman was very upset in that he put himself in that situation. So the Gemara said, Meikara ma'asavar. So why did he do it? Well, the Basof ma'asavar. Then why did he regret it? Meikara savar m'sarcha lo tisalen. In the beginning of Basay, he thought to himself, listen, this is my relative. This girl's my relative. And now, by the way, she lost her mother. I have an obligation to help her out. Literally, again, from your own flesh, do not turn away. There's an obligation to help out your relatives. Well, the Basof savar. But at the end, what did he realize? Adam chashav shiny. I will say, this is actually, Adam chashav, an important person is different. I will say, so what Rav Nachman is really highlighting here is something very profound, which is that sometimes when a person is an individual, they have a right to put their family's needs before others. Sometimes when a person has the responsibility of communal leadership, ultimately they don't have that right. And they don't have the right to put their family's needs before others. And sometimes they have to think about the community and the impact of their decisions on the community even before their own family, which is such an incredible yesod. So comes along Rav Nachman and says, people look at me and they learn from my behaviors. And what I do, they assume that whatever I do is correct, is yashar, is appropriate. And they're going to learn from my actions what to do. And what I just did, essentially, is manipulated a legal loophole, again, totally legal, for the benefit of my own relative. Is this the right thing to do? You're depriving someone else of something. It's legal. Sometimes things are legal. It doesn't mean that they're right. So ultimately, again, he was also so really a profound Gemara, because the truth is every person is an Adam Chashav, right? Each of us is an important person, and how careful we have to be in life to make sure that our actions are not only legal, right, but they're right. V'asisam hayasher v'hatov. Kadosh Baruch Hu says, do that which is correct and that which is good. Because sometimes that which is correct may not be that which is good. Right? That's why it says hayasher v'hatov. Make sure, number one, what you're doing is legal. After you've crossed the threshold of legality, making sure everything you're doing is legal, is correct, then make sure it's also tov. Make sure it's also good. Incredible. So Gufa Amr Shmuel Mocher Shtachal Lechaver V'Chazor Machlo Machol. So we said before Shmuel said, you sell a debt, right? Reuven lent money to Shimon and then sells the debt to Levi. And then afterwards, again, Reuven forgives the debt. The forgiveness works. Not only that, when Reuven dies, and Reuven Jr. now has the ability to go ahead and forgive the debt as well. Now, says, therefore, again, it's good eitzah. Therefore, the Gemara says, if the purchaser, i.e. Levi, is a smart guy, what will he do? Mekarkash le zuze the kasav l'shtara b'shmei. We will say fascinating. If Levi is a smart guy, the moment he purchases this debt from Reuven, what will he do? He'll go to Shimon and he'll say, Shimon, listen, here's what I'm willing to do. I'm willing to forgive some amount of the debt or pay you some money. Let's redraft this document as an agreement between me and you. And therefore, remove Reuven from the picture so that neither Reuven nor Reuven Jr. have any ability of mechila. So again, it's going to cost Levi a little bit of money, but he ensures that his debt will always be collectible. Incredible. Amra Meimar, man didoin dina digarmi. Supposed to listen to this. There's a concept of dina digarmi. Now, we're not going to get into grama versus garmi, bless you. But again, what it means is like this. Indirect damages. You're both saying there's direct damages. What are direct damages? I go over to you and I break your arm. That's pretty direct. Right? Then there's indirect damages, which we'll say, what's a good case of indirect damages? Reuven sells a loan to Levi, Reuven lends money to Shimon, goes ahead and makes a loan to Levi, and then what does Reuven do? Reuven decides, you know what? It's a Tzar Simei Tshuva. He's really like in the groove of Mechila, right? He's being mochel everyone, and he decides, you know what? Shimon, I'm mochel the debt. Beautiful, right? Beautiful. It's always easier to do mechila when it's on someone else's cheshbon. Right? So ultimately, again, he's mochel the debt. So I will say, now what has Reuven done? He's damaged Levi. Now, is that direct damages? No. It's indirect damages. So I will say, so therefore, again, interestingly enough, so the one who holds you liable for Dina de Garmi, Magbi Bey Demeshtar Ma'alya, ultimately, again, then Levi will have a claim against Reuven for the full value of the loan, or whatever the purchase price was. Mandelo Dina de Garmi, but the ones who don't hold you liable for indirect damages, Magbi Demei Naira Ba'alma. The most ultimately, again, that Levi, the claim that Levi has against Reuven is what? The value of the paper. The value of the paper. Okay? So the Gemara says as follows. Hava uvda, the kafye raf from the Ravashi, the agbive kishur letzami. We'll say this once happened, and ultimately, again, Rafram forced Ravashi to repay the full value, like a person who uses a beam, ultimately, again, for images. So we'll say that's an expression. Rashi points out over here, kishur letzalmi, kilomar gibui gomer kol ahafsid diktik bo kashe daktik halokech kor latzor botzuros. So when a person purchases a beam of wood in order to make engravings, they make sure that the beam is exact. So too, ultimately, so Rafram forced Ravashi in this kind of case, where apparently Ravashi was the one who, after selling the debt, forgave it. He forced him to go ahead and pay full damages. Okay? And we'll say that's how we paskin, by the way. That if you go out, although in this case, Reuven, after selling the debt to Levi, does have the ability to forgive the debt, he does have the right, were he to forgive the debt, would be chayiv full damages to Levi for having forgiven the debt. Okay? So, Amra Meimer Mished Rabbi Chama. Hayman di'ika alei ksuvas isha ubalcho. We'll say interesting case. Let's say a man, we'll call him Reuven. Right? Reuven has two obligations upon him. A ksuva towards his wife and a creditor. So let's say again, Reuven is married to Rachel, Reuven gets divorced. And I will say, Reuven also borrowed money from Shimon. So now Reuven has two people knocking on his door. His wife for a ksuva, and ultimately again Shimon to repay the loan. Now he happens to have real estate and he has money, so who gets what? So the Gemara says, so to the creditor you pay money, and to a woman you pay real estate. So the Gemara says, Hai ki dine v'hai ki dine. Each one goes ahead and ultimately, again, gets what is coming to them. I was about to say, because generally, a loan is repaid with money, right, with cash, and a ksuva, ultimately, again, is a lien against all property. So again, even though a ksuva could also be paid out with cash, generally, again, a ksuva, because of the nature of the lien, makes sense to pay it out with real property as well. So the Gemara says, they will say, what happens if Reuven only has one piece of real estate? And then one piece of real estate is only what? Could only satisfy either ksuva or debt. So what's talacha? So the Gemara says, we give it to the creditor, we don't give it to the woman, which is fascinating. Why? My taima, yoser mimasha ish lisa. Isha rotilinasa, because more than a man wants to get married, a woman wants to get married. As well say, which is really quite. What does that mean? We're not concerned that a woman is going to abstain from getting married because she knows that she may not get paid when there's only enough property for one creditor. As well say, what we are concerned about is people won't lend money if they're not what? If they're not assured of some type of repayment. Remember again, in general, Jewish lending is already not a financially advantageous endeavor because you can't charge interest. Right? So already by definition, again, I'm already lending as a form of tzedakah. Leaving aside a heter iska, but again, I'm generally, so again, the only way a person is going to lend is if they know they're guaranteed of some level of repayment. So therefore, again, the Gemara says if you only have a choice between paying off your creditor or paying the ksuva, ultimately pay the creditor. Now again, to be clear, because we are afraid people won't lend money. We're not afraid people aren't going to get married. Now that being said, remember, even if you have only one piece of property, the debt doesn't go away, right? So Reuven's still chayiv to go and make good on the debt to the woman, to his wife later, or ex-wife later on. A person ultimately, again, who goes ahead and borrows money, and he has property. So we'll say, so now watch this. So Reuven borrowed $10,000 from Shimon. Now Reuven has a piece of property. Now the creditor Shimon comes along and says, pay me back my money. So Reuven says, fine. Zil shakal me'ara. So Reuven says, listen, fine, no problem. Here's the real estate. You go and sell it and get your money. So we'll say, so what's the halacha? We tell Reuven, no. You go sell the property, get the proceeds of the sale, and go ahead and give it to Shimon. In other words, the burden to sell the property is not on Shimon. The burden to sell the property is on you, Reuven, the borrower. So ultimately, again, he said, no, that's not what was said. Tell me, what was the story that happened that led you to this conclusion? So I will say this was a different case. This was the case where Reuven borrowed $10,000 from Shimon. Shimon comes to go ahead and collect money, right? And Reuven claimed that he had no property. But Shimon said, but one second, what about that piece of land? And Reuven said, oh, that's not mine. That's not mine. He lied. And he said that the land belonged to his Gentile neighbor. In that case, hu asa shelo gahogen lefichach asubo shelo gahogen. Reuven acted inappropriately, therefore we acted inappropriately with him. In other words, he acted inappropriately by claiming he had no assets. When it's determined that he does have assets, we put the burden of selling the real estate on him, getting the cash and giving it to Shimon. But it's possible that in a regular case where Reuven borrows $10,000, Shimon shows up and says, pay me back my money, that Reuven could pay in real estate, and ultimately the obligation to sell and convert it to cash would be upon Shimon. Which I will say is an interesting halacha. So it sounds like from what the Gemara is saying over here, is that even if you borrow money, and the lender comes and demands repayment, you can give an item of value in lieu of money, in satisfaction of the debt. Now I will say, obviously, this is assuming the parties did not stipulate. Right? If let's say, right, if Shimon lends Reuven $10,000 and Shimon says, you have to pay me back $10,000 cash, of course, you have to pay back cash. In the absence of a stipulation, it's possible that Reuven could give an item of value to Shimon, and then the burden of selling that item and converting it to cash rests upon Shimon. Incredible. According to you, who says that the repayment of a debt is a mitzvah. We'll say it's a mitzvah to repay your debts. Amar lo nichale David mitzvah mai. This is great. We'll say, right. Shimon lends Reuven $10,000. Right, now what happens? So Shimon comes and wants repayment for his money. He says, Reuven, you have to pay me back, and it's a mitzvah. And what does Reuven say? The truth is, as a serious ben tshuva, I've been taking a serious accounting of my life. Baruch Hashem, I'm happy to inform you, I have enough mitzvahs. I'm good. I don't need this particular mitzvah, but thank you so much for asking. So I say, so what's the halacha? So the Gemara says, b'mitzvahs lo saseh. Aval b'mitzvos asay kigon she'omrim lo asay sukkah ve'ena oseh lula ve'ena oseh. So when it comes to positive mitzvahs, if a person is not performing a mitzvah like build a sukkah, and I will say that ultimately a person gets malchus, 40 malchus. You get malchus when if you violate an avera. Person, right, does whatever the avera, right? You get malchus. But if let's say we go over to him and say, Reuven, you haven't built your sukkah yet. You have to build the sukkah for Yom Tiv. Or you haven't purchased lulav and esrog. And he refuses to do so. Amud Beis, makin oso ad sheteitze nafsho. Ultimately, I will say what? We go ahead and we flog him. I will say ad sheteitze nafsho literally means until he dies. Now that's not going to be literal, but lamaisa, what you see over here is we compel a person to perform even a mitzvah saseh, a positive commandment. And therefore, I will say in this case over here as well, paying back a debt is a mitzvah saseh, is a positive mitzvah. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, if Reuven comes along and says, no, thank you, I don't need to go ahead and perform. So by the way, I will say the mitzvah saseh of paying back a debt, Rashi points out, is Hin tzedek. So I will say it's actually the pasuk talking about having appropriate weights and measures. So in that pasuk, Chazal learn out that it is a mitzvah to go ahead and repay your debts. So therefore, halacha l'maisa, the Gemara says that even if he doesn't want to repay his debt, there's a mitzvah to go out. We flog him ultimately again until he performs his mitzvah. I will say, so what does it mean? Achetetze nafsho. Again, you're going to flog a person until he dies for not taking lulav? Of course not. I will say, so again, if you think about those words, it's so beautiful. We compel him, achetetze nafsho, which means until his nefesh, right? Until his ruchnius comes out. In other words, every Jew wants to go ahead and perform a mitzvahs aseh. Every single Jew. Some of us know it. Some of us don't yet know it. And sometimes you have to help a person come to their true spiritual consciousness. And sometimes the way we go ahead and we help a person come to their true spiritual consciousness is how? Through coercion. I will say, by the way, it's the same way, right? The famous case of this is by gitting. Right, the man is supposed to go out and give his wife a get under certain circumstances. He refuses to do so. What's the halacha? Kofin also ad sheyomer rotza ani. We go ahead and we force him until he says, "Okay, I'm willing to do it." It's a get musa, it's a compelled get. No, we assume that people want to do the right thing. Just sometimes they need a little bit of help in getting there. Rabbi will say, but again, here's just such a profound lashon. Who doesn't want to perform a mitzvah? We'll say, who doesn't want to perform a mitzvah? Who doesn't want to be close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Who doesn't want a relationship? Who doesn't want to be a tzaddik? Some of us act on it, and others of us need a push. Ad shetetze nafsho. I want my nefesh, I want my neshama to come out. But so often it's obscured by so many layers of mundanity. That's what I will say. If you surround yourself with the right people, they'll push you. But at the end of the day, no matter how much others push you, also ultimately, makinis atzmo. I have to push myself. Ad shetetze nafshi. Until ultimately, again, my nefesh, my neshama, my ruchnius rises to the surface. What's a very interesting case. Man says to his wife, this is your get, but it's only going to be chal after 30 days. After 30 days, which is fine, right? And what happens? The Achar Shlosh Gemara says, "V'halcha v'hinachto b'tzidir sh'rabim." And then what happens? Rabbi will say, the man puts the get in the sides, right? On the sides, in the shoulder of a sh'rabim. Mahu. What's talacha? Rabbi will say, is the get triggered after 30 days? So Amalei Eina Migaresh. He said to him, no, she's not Migaresh. So I'm Rav Shmuel. So remember again, we're going back now. Halacha l'maisa to the opinion of Rabbi Tarfon, who said that halacha l'maisa, you can go ahead and seize assets after Reuven passes away from his estate, as long as what? Those assets are piled up in, right, if you're a balchov, you could seize from Reuven's estate, as long as they're piled up in the Rosh Hashanah. And I will say, so therefore you see Rosh Hashanah is no one has any claim on it. So therefore, halacha l'maisa, the Gemara says that Rosh Hashanah is public domain, obviously. Tzidei Rosh Hashanah has the same din as public domain, and therefore leaving a get in the side of Rosh Hashanah does not allow for effective divorce to occur. Adarab, I can say just the opposite. Migurashas midrav Nachman, the Amr Rav Nachman, Amr Abba Refuah, Homer lechaver, a person says to his friend, Mishoch para zu v'lo siekinu lecha ad la'achar shloshim yom. If a person says to his friend, go ahead and take this para, right? Go ahead and do mashicha on this para, and it will not become yours until after 30 days. Kana, after 30 days he acquires it. Vafilu omedes ba'agam. Even if the cow is somewhere else. My love, hainu agam, hainu tzidur shradim. And I will say, agam literally means a swamp or a marsh. Isn't the swamp or the marsh the same thing ultimately again as the size of a shusarabim? Lo, agam lochud, v'tzidur shusarabim lochud. No, not necessarily. The agam, the swamp, is one thing. Tzidur shusarabim is a different thing. Ikeda, I will say an alternate version of this. Amalei migureshes. Others say, both say in this case, where a husband gives his wife a get, says the get will be chal after 30 days, and he deposits the get on the sides of the Rosh Hashanah, that she's migureshes after 30 days. Midrav Nachman, because what did Rav Nachman say? B'tzidir Shirabim ke'agam dami, because Tzidir Shirabim is not like Rosh Hashanah, right? They both say again, the Tzidir is like, remember, Tzidir Shirabim, the sides is where there's not as much pedestrian traffic. So ultimately, again, it's more like an agam, more like a marsh. So it's public, but not fully public. And therefore, again, she should be megareshes. Adrabah, Eina Migureshes Midrav Shmuel. My love, the Hainu Rosh Hashanah, Hainu Tzidei Rosh Hashanah. We'll say, don't we say that ultimately again Rosh Hashanah is the same thing as Tzidei Rosh Hashanah? Lo Rosh Hashanah v'chod v'Tzidei Rosh Hashanah v'chod. Rabbi said we'd have to say that what Rosh Hashanah is one thing, Tzidei Rosh Hashanah is something different. We'll say bottom line, by the way, in this case where a man makes his t'nai, there is no problem with making a t'nai that a get should be chal at a later date. That's not a problem. The problem in this case is what? The placement of the get in Tzidei Rosh Hashanah. That's the problem we have, right? So now remember again, a get has to be delivered into the domain of the wife. So the problem is, Tzidei Rosh Hashanah still has a din of Rosh Hashanah. Therefore, ultimately, again, the gerushin will not work after 30 days, right? We'll say we'll have to stop over here for today. All right, we'll catch up. We'll catch up in Hashem. We'll say after Sukkot for sure. Right by Chanukah, we are going to be right back on track. We'll say shkoyach.